Hey guys, happy Wednesday. Today is Wednesday, April 29th, and I'm going to introduce our PEP topic for today. And this is a man of history. He is from Great Britain and for London. And if you were in morning meeting on Friday, our fact was actually about this man. His name is Winston Churchill. So I'm going to do a little bit of reading. This is a really long read aloud. So I'm going to do a little bit of reading from it, but then I'm also going to give you a little bit of history. So this is called The Inspiring Tale of Winston Churchill. If you look closely, you can kind of see what he looked like. When the entire free world was in its darkest hour, a man came along and took reins of power. He told us to never give up, to do all to defend. No matter how great the toll, we must fight on till the end. Things didn't look good. We were at the end of our rope, but this man showed us courage and this man gave us hope. His name was Winston Churchill, and what you'll soon learn, our freedom didn't come easy, it had to be earned. Born in Woodstock, England in 1874, rebellious by nature, who at times was a chore. His mom, Jeannie, was American. She was a socialite. She was very beautiful with eyes large and bright. Winston was more like his dad, Lord Randolph Churchill. He was a politician with a strong will. Winston had one younger brother. His name was John. The brothers were close and well they got on. One thing about Winston when it came to his father, you might wonder why he cared or even bothered. You see, they weren't close. Dad was often on the move. And whatever Winston did, Dad would seldom approve. But there was one thing that Winston did believe. Dad was a great politician who even overachieved. But as his career ended poorly, which at the time wasn't fair, vowing to restore his dad's legacy, Winston did swear. Winston wasn't the best student. He didn't score well in school, but if you thought he was dumb, then perhaps you were fooled. There were things he was good at, like history for one, and also English and writing. He became second to none. But pondering his future left Winston perplexed. Then it came to him what to do next. It took Winston 3 tries, but he eventually got in. Then a brand new chapter was set to begin. He entered military college, which was at Sandhurst. Winston wasn't the top cadet, but far from the worst. Life in the military, he started finding his groove. The discipline suited him, and it helped him improve. It made up for insecurities, which he'd held from his past. It created willpower in Winston, and all his life it would last. This newfound strength allowed to be bold, and it created one of the greatest stories ever told. So then this story goes on to talk about some of the things that Winston Churchill did once he got into college. So he did really well in college. He took a position as an officer. And it didn't pay very much, but he didn't want to use his mom's money. So he came up with an idea, and he became a war correspondent. So he used his talents to write about things in history so the wars that were going on. So he was sent off to Cuba, which there was a war going on at the time. And then he went to India to cover the war there. And he did really well, and he wrote his first book. He went to Sudan and he wrote a second book called The River War, and it was again really well received, so people really liked reading his writing. It showed that hard work pays off if you want to achieve, is what he said. I'm just going to pick up a little reading here. Those were important times, and they played a key role. Winston now felt that his future was in control. He was really thinking about ways to succeed. Maybe follow in Dad's footsteps, Winston wanted to lead. But first off to South Africa to cover a new war. So he was going to South Africa to cover a new war, to write about it again. And when he was there, the troops came under attack while he was on a train, and he was marched off to jail. Well, he escaped from jail and went back to Great Britain. And it says here that he was very brave for doing that, for escaping. It says, Winston wasn't a superhero and he didn't wear a big cape, but when he saw an opening, he found a way to escape. Cheered heartily back home when it had become known how he'd stood up to danger all on his own. Happy to return to England, his eyes had a gleam. Happy to be back home, he now chased his dream. He ran for the seat in Oldham and came out number 1. Now with the seat in Parliament, his political career had begun. So in 1900, it would be hard to dismiss the significance of Winston first taking office. Winston was young, just 26 years of age, though not long in the tooth, he was rather sage. Before he had a chance to move up in the ranks, Winston went and switched parties to not many thanks. But Winston being Winston, he got his career back on track. Ambition and boldness he certainly didn't lack. However, Europe was changing. Countries were taking up arms. Then an assassination in Sarajevo set off an alarm. It was in 1914 all would come to a pour as the world plunged into the First World War. It was called the Great War, with Germany on one side. Great Britain was on the other, the side of the Allies. Winston was in charge of the Navy, a very important post. They guarded the shipping lanes and helped protect the coast. So he was in charge of that. Winston had made some moves right before the start when he got the fleet updated, which turned out very smart. But disaster was to strike during an assault on Turkey, and Winston was blamed for that failure at sea. Winston, of course, was upset when removed from his post, but it was the loss of the men that hurt him the most. Then after much contemplation and thought in advance, he chose to fight at the front and went off to France. So he decided to go back into the military instead of just being in charge of the post, and he went off to fight in the Great War in France. He was at first looked down upon by his battalion of men, but he won them over with courage, showed time and again. When Winston's time was up there, he said his goodbyes, and he'd earned the respect of all of the guys. The Allies came out on top, and the fighting did cease. The Great War had been won, and now there was peace. There was a huge celebration. Everyone was content. It was the war to end all wars, so it was a massive event. The 20s were about prosperity. They were really sublime. After the hard-fought peace, it was the best of the times. It seemed it would last forever, like the view from a mountaintop, but there were problems ahead, and the good would soon stop. By the time the 30s had hit, the world was in depression, so that means the world was in a very sad time. Those were difficult times without a question, and then something worse would have to be faced, perhaps the most dangerous ever, one could argue the case. You see, the Nazis in Germany had just come to power, and the hard-fought world peace would be turning sour. Winston was the only one who warned of the danger, but people just ignored him like he was a stranger. But Winston didn't stop. His purpose was steady. He said the Nazis were plotting and we had to be ready. People thought he was crazy. Appeasement was the way. They had hoped the Nazis' menace would just go away. So at this time, he's the only one who is being realistic or thinking that this could really happen, that they had to be ready for the Nazis to try to take over. And the people were against him, and instead of kind of just saying, okay, fine, whatever, he continued to fight and tell them what his thoughts were on it. But Winston kept on urging to anyone who would hear, saying that if we weren't careful, we'd lose all that was dear. Although it wasn't his wish, it turned out he was right, and the world would be in for its most epic of fights. The Czech Republic was overrun, and the world became vexed. Then it was Slovakia that was conquered next. The Nazis wouldn't listen, nor would they withdraw, but the invasion of Poland became the last straw. War was then declared, and the situation was bleak. We were far from being ready, and our leadership was weak. What is fair to say, the free world was in trouble. Someone great was needed to pull us out of the rubble. Okay, so this is World War II is what the time frame that they're talking about. So at 65 years of age, Winston was called on to lead, to be Great Britain's prime minister, to which he agreed. He said all he could offer was blood, toil, tears, and sweat. He gave a speech for the ages one will never forget. Though as the war progressed, it wasn't going well, and things got even worse when Ally France fell. But it was Winston who'd say, we'll see a better dawn, and it was always Winston urging us to fight on. Winston's constant encouragement and ability to lead uplifted everyone's spirits in this great time of need. He said there would be victory at no matter what the cost, because without victory, all would be lost. He'd say we'd fight in the hills and we'd fight on the beaches. He said we'd never surrender. It was the greatest of speeches. There were some huge setbacks and much cause for concern, but the Allies fought back and the tide started to turn. The beach landing at Normandy, also known as D-Day, was the beginning of the end and helped pave the way. It was the most daring of missions the world had ever seen, and perhaps the most important in the fight to be free. After the beaches were taken, they rolled on through France. The Allies saw their opening and were taking their chance. In less than a year, all of Europe had won. The Allies had come out on top, and tyranny was done. You can imagine the celebrations and how happy people were. Called the party of the century, and you'd have to concur. But Winston remained humble and didn't take any glory. Instead, he chose to call it the people's victory. In a way, he was right. Everyone had done their part, but none more than Winston. You can take that to heart. What is pretty clear as the history books are penned, with Winston on our side, things turned out well in the end. After the war, Winston had more time to write. His party had lost power, giving him a brief respite. But none wanted to stay down. Winston's will remained firm. He again became prime minister, winning yet another term. So a prime minister in Great Britain is kind of like a president. So they have a queen who is kind of the ruler of their country, but they also have a prime minister who makes a lot of the decisions. So he became prime minister for a second term at this time. Journalist, historian, adventurer, he was a great many things, always daring boldly and taking his best swing. Soldier, politician, leader, whatever was needed for a spark. And one thing's for certain, Winston sure left his mark. Winston came along when he needed him the most, and what he accomplished he had every reason to boast. But he chose to give credit to his fellow countrymen. Although not a tall man, he seemed as large as Big Ben. And if you remember his goal, well, he can be more than just glad, because he was able to restore the legacy of his dad. But more importantly, he ensured that we were all free, and that makes him a legend, you'd have to agree. Hopefully in our lives, we won't have to fight any wars, but there are some lessons that we'd best not ignore. If you don't surrender and never accept defeat, if you fight on till the end, then victory will be complete. He taught us many things, did this great man. If you want something bad enough, then you most surely can. So just give all of your effort and never give in. Then at the end of the day, you'll most certainly win. So that's the end of our story. And that was written by somebody from England. So they're talking about how much they admire Winston Churchill. And he worked really, really hard in his life and accomplished a lot of wonderful things. So that's a little bit about him and how he became famous. He's most famous for leading Great Britain to their positive part of winning World War II and beating the Nazis. So you're gonna today have a little coloring page of Winston Churchill, and let me pull up his picture so you can kind of see what he looked like. So you can see he always had that hat on, and he always dressed in nice suits and things like that. So that will give you an idea of how you can make him look in your coloring page. All right, have a great Wednesday, and I will see you guys soon. I miss you. Bye.